I'm just going to do a bit of a quick intro about Fortis. Obviously, we provide a lot of different services. We work in some of your schools and organisations and some we don't work in. We work in about 60, 65 schools now. That's mainstreams, alternative provisions, SEMH provisions. We go from having someone in a school half a day a week through to someone being in school full time. So we do a lot of work with the pupils, but we also embed ourselves within the teams to be there to support the adults as well. Because if the adults aren't okay and the children aren't okay, then we're on a hiding to nothing. So, the idea is that we look at whole organisational approaches or helping to be able to collaborate with the school on how to be able to support everybody within it. We do all these different services. When I first set up the business 12 years ago, it was just me and one other. And now there's a team of about 50 odd, I think, people. It seems to be growing all the time. I've stopped looking because it's a little bit scary if I start to think about how responsible we are for all these people's incomes. But yeah, so we've grown massively and we cover a huge area, and not just in education, but we work in different sectors as well. So this week alone, we've been working in renewables, in police forces, accountancy firms. I was with a law firm last Friday afternoon delivering a session to them, and they're all half cut, so that was fun. So we're doing everything. But what we do is, what we learn in different organisations and different sectors, we bring back into education, because ultimately it's all about people, isn't it? That's what we're all working with all the time. Sadly, one of the biggest things that we've seen an increase in is the trauma response for critical incidences. In the last 10 days, we've had 3 where organisations have got in touch with and said someone's either attempted to take their own life and thankfully didn't manage it, but 2 did actually manage to take their own lives. And so we go in as a trauma response to be able to help the processing of that, because it hits everybody. We reckon it's about 120 people, one person who takes their own life. That's the ripple effect of it that it impacts on. And I think with social media, it's probably a lot more, because we know of people, maybe didn't know them, closely, but we do know of a lot of people now. So we go in and do that work. Now, that is, to me, heartbreaking that we're having to go in and do that. And we've done that in schools where there's been, again, suicides, or there's been murders and, different situations that have happened in communities. So we want to prevent that happening as much as possible. And at the moment, I feel like we're swimming against the tide with it, which is incredibly sad. But we try and do our best to try and mitigate those risks in everything we do. So what we're going to think about today is we're going to look at this current research that for the Teacher Wellbeing Index, which has been done for the past 7 years. And so there's a really good now data set there about what is happening and what are the patterns that are going on for teachers and their wellbeing. Now, when I've done events like this before, I've talked a lot about children and their mental health and young people, which I'm very passionate about. But I also think that if we don't look after the adults in education, then we're never going to be able to meet the needs of the children. So we need to kind of make sure that that's prioritised. I'll put in a couple of case vignettes as well, just to kind of put it into context. And we'll also be reflecting on that, what can be done. And that's come from the research, and it also comes from what we see in terms of the work we do in schools and the impact that has. So what I want you to do before we start is I want you to just scale how you're doing today. Okay, just 1 to 10. So 1 is you feel terrible, which I hope nobody does, because we've had quite a nice morning and we've got Haribo. Can't be that bad. Lunch is coming soon, so it can't be that bad. And 10 is feeling amazing, top of the world, best you've ever felt. Okay, I don't want you to tell me the number, but I do want you to think about not just, I think I'm about a 5. I want you to think about mentally, emotionally, physically, because if you've got any physical pain or discomfort, that will affect your mental health, your relationships, personally and professionally. And just make a mental note of that number and think about where I am. And think about how often you actually ask yourself that question. How am I doing today? Where am I at? Because we're usually so busy running at full pelt that we forget to think about actually how am I doing? Am I up to what I've got planned in today? Am I feeling tired? Are there things that are bothering me? And scaling is a really helpful tool to be able to actually think, this is where I'm at. It's subjective, it's entirely personal to you, but we'll look at this a bit later on and think about that a bit more. Okay? Has everyone got a number? Don't look all sad. Sad? It wasn't meant to make you sad. Okay? Okay, so next one, we're going to do buckaroo. So on your tables, you've got a buckaroo that's set up to go. I want you to have a quick play on your tables, just to break up this morning and afternoon, and see who wins, okay? All right? We've set them up to the middle setting, so they're not too easy to go, and they're not too difficult. Everyone's playing now, that's it, lost them. Okay, everyone okay to come back? No. Katie's like, no, I need to win it. Okay. How did you find that? Bit of fun? Yeah? Why do you think I've chosen a buckaroo? Because I'm childish. David's hit the nail on the head.
A lot to carry.
Got a lot to juggle. Yes, a lot to carry. So I always think with buckaroo, you know, you keep loading on. And for those of you where it didn't pop, we just keep going, don't we? We just keep loading until at some point we hit a wall or something, a grenade is thrown into our lives and we don't know how we're going to cope with it, and we get into that massive sense of overwhelm. So when we're thinking about well-being, we're thinking about buckaroo, basically. That's how my brain works. That how much are we actually carrying? What is that we're carrying? And how much do we carry until we fall over or buck in some way or another? Okay? So a bit of fun, but also a bit of a message behind it, really, that we will often just keep loading. Because I'm all right. And then, especially in education, and I've worked with lots of you for lots of years now, what happens when you get to a holiday, the summer holiday, is you crash into the summer holiday and then end up being ill, or, you know, something that you've been keeping at arm's length for a while suddenly hits. So we know that there are signs there about how we manage our time, how we manage our energy, how we manage burnout, and all of those aspects. So this piece of research really kind of fits with that. So I don't know if anybody's read it, but the Teacher Wellbeing Index gives us a real overview of everybody, right from the senior leaders right through to the teaching assistants and support. And it looks at all the key challenges. And some of the ideas it comes out with is about policy improvement and what we need to do in order to be able to help people to actually remain in education, because lots of people leave education because they just can't do it anymore. And I've heard that more times than I would like to over the past 12 years. Or they keep going and go through that cycle of burning out and then, you know, recover and then keep going again. It highlights the importance of senior leaders and what they need to be aware of. It also recognises the need for understanding staff wellbeing. It's critical. So when we go back to what Natalie was talking about earlier, if we're looking at retention and we're also looking at performance, then, you know, actually understanding staff wellbeing is huge, because it's a massive help when you look at how much it costs you to keep recruiting people and keep that kind of wheel turning, when actually if we looked at staff retention and their wellbeing, we would need to do that less. And I know there's lots of pressures from government as well, and they change their mind all the time, don't they? And you prepare for one thing and then it becomes something else. And now we're going for a general election, it could all change again. So you're in that kind of choppy water as well at the same time. It gives us those evidence-based insights. So, you know, we can go to this report and look at it and go, right, we can see the trends over the past 7 years, and that actually helps us to think about what's coming next. Because there's not many numbers that are going down in this report. Most of them are going up. Okay? And it helps us to drive those changes because there's data connected to it. So I've got a wellbeing quiz. You are now in teams on your table. So I want you to throw out to me what answers you think are correct for this. So what percentage of head teachers describe themselves as stressed in the report? I'm going to give you options. Is it 85, 90, 95 or 100? 100 over here.
We're going B.
You're going B? What have we got?
C.
We've got C. Have we all got an answer? Okay. The answer is C, 95%. 95%. So 95% of head teachers are describing themselves as stressed. Okay? It's not good, is it? That's a very, very high number. Okay, what percentage of education staff reported that their institution's organisational culture has a negative effect on their well-being in 2023? Options: 38, 46, 55 or 60%. What do we think? Are we going for 55 on here? 55? 55? Back table? 60? 55?
We think 60 maybe.
60 maybe? It's very certain, your answer there. This one? 60?
Yeah, we've gone 60.
60. The answer is 55. Yes?
Should it clarify, because it's now well, is there a prize?
There is a prize for this. Okay, so question 3. What was the most common symptom of poor mental health experienced by education staff in the past year? Was it irritability or mood swings, tearfulness, insomnia or difficulty sleeping, or difficulty concentrating? Have a quick discussion.
Adam, we're judging you on this. Are you feeling like that? What about alcohol? Drinks.
Yeah, there's no alcohol on this list, so I'm not sure it's accurate, but...
My biggest thing.
What do we think? C, sleeping, sort of personal experience. Wake at 4 in the morning. Back table, what have you got? Possibly sleeping? Sleeping? Yeah? Sleeping? Sleeping. None of you are sleeping very well, are you? You're absolutely right. It was. Is the insomnia or difficulty sleeping? Why do you think that might? Why do you think that affects us in that way if we're really stressed? Active mind. Yeah, your mind's going round and round. 3 o'clock in the morning thoughts, as Adam referred to earlier. You know, everything seems very important at 3 in the morning, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Question 4. What percentage of education staff feel isolated from others often or always at work? 10, 17, 22 or 26? What was that? Yeah, catch you out now. What do we think? Got an answer? 17. So you're going B? Any A's? D. Come on then, give me your answers. B. B, 17. It is 17%. Katie's celebrating that 17% of people are isolated within education. Just pointing that out, Katie. It seems lower than we thought. According to the report, what percentage of school and college staff believe that inspections are not fit for purpose? 38, 52, 64 or 73? Is everyone saying 73? If it said 100%, would you have gone for that? Yeah, 73, well done. Okay, last question. What percentage of staff experienced mental health issues in the past academic year? This is 2023, remember? 42, 59, 64, 81. Have a chat.
Yeah, 81.
You're going 81? 81 as a table yet? What do you think? C? 64? C? Everyone's like that. Don't say. C? 64? What was that, B or C? Well, which is it, Claire? Just whatever. Back there? D? What are you going for? B? Okay.
Oh, we're going D.
We're going D. We're
We
doomed.
would have gone higher if there was a choice.
It's D, 81%. Who do we think won that? Us. How many did you get right?
All of them but one.
Yes, sir.
Oh, we've got 2 boxes of chocolates. We've only got 1 box of chocolates. You have to share them, I'm afraid. They're around here.
Oh no, we've got the chocolates. Give them to
Katie's not having the chocolates. Who was the other one? Really kind. Who was the other one? One wrong?
No, we got one. We can give it like one.
Going over here then. Well done.
one wrong.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there anything that surprises you or anything that resonates in that? Does it resonate or is there any surprises? Resonates? It's kind of what you're seeing? Yeah? Yeah, so with what we do in schools, we're seeing those patterns as well. And part of my role now, as it's evolving constantly, is working and providing, reflective practice or therapeutic coaching or therapy for leaders in education. Because often there is that 95% is absolutely felt. And it doesn't just affect you at work, does it? It affects you everywhere. You don't switch that off. So more research. So we've got the 95% on there. 78% of all education staff report being stressed. That's 3% up on 2022. 89% of senior leaders report being stressed, 63% of support staff and 78% of teaching staff. So it's rippled all the way through the system.
Do you think that was the same though if you were to ask that of business owners?
Yes.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, I think stress, we're living with stress. That's why services like Fortis are growing constantly, because that's what we're kind of expecting now, to live with stress, which obviously isn't good for our health at all. But in education, they've been rising consistently over the past few years, and that's borne out in this research. The higher stress levels correlate with increased mental health issues and attrition rates, and there's also those urgent need for strategies to reduce that and also improve the working conditions. Okay? When we're thinking about organisational culture and wellbeing, they also ask questions about that too. And in the report, it shows that the negative impacts on wellbeing if the organisational culture is not in a good place. And I think they're going back to the multi-academy trusts. There's often, some of the heads that I work with have gone through the process whilst I've been working with them going into multi-academy trusts. And often sometimes it's really good and it's really supportive, and other times they feel like it's only supportive when there's something going wrong and everybody swoops in. So it's about how do we actually make sure that those schools have their own culture within a bigger culture, because every school that I've ever been in has got its own way of doing things. I know you're all working to the same things, but they're not the same vibes, they're not the same focus in certain things, depending on the demographic you've got in school as well. 22% had a feeling that organisational culture positively impacts on their wellbeing, which is amazing, and that's fantastic. However, that's decreased from 30% from 2020, which is interesting because 2020 was the year of craziness, or the beginning of the year of craziness, anyway. 55% of team members report their organisational culture negatively affects their wellbeing, and that's increased as well from 38% in 2020. And again, figures down here are kind of fairly consistent with what we're seeing with stress levels as well. The external pressures obviously have a huge impact, because when we go back to controlling the controllables, when you're actually working and managing a school, there are lots of things that are happening around you that you can't control, that you have to respond and react to. So some of the recommendations in the report, it's recognising that there's underfunded public services and increased child poverty. So there's more and more schools, we're seeing more and more schools where they're having to think about that demographic, the socio-economic situation that some of the children are in, giving breakfast for children coming into school, and recognising that actually if their behaviour is escalating in class, Have they eaten since they ate lunch at school the day before? You know, there's an awful lot of different, quite serious strands into this.
Just to say on that as well, something's just come out from the DfE, ironically, that base funding for an individual child going to a school hasn't increased since 2010.
Wow.
And there's nothing that I've seen that it will increase either.
No.
And the average school budget now is over 60% just doing gas and electric.
Wow.
Before they've even looked at provision.
Wow. That's massive, isn't it? Huge. I've put this comment in here about the post-pandemic scarring because I think that's a really great word for actually describing how people are responding to what's happened in the pandemic. And not that I want to go back to that, but there's definitely a ripple effect still happening within education, within mental health services, within businesses. It hasn't ended yet. It's still going. And I think it probably will go in terms of what we see in families and development for quite a few generations to come, because there's been a lot of things that have been changed as a result of having been in that situation. Pupil behaviour has also been recognised as having a negative impact. And I think that's interesting as well, because there's a reason why pupil behaviour, assuming it's bad behaviour or difficult behaviour, has increased. And it's looking at the context of that behaviour that we need to be thinking about, not just how do we manage that behaviour, what's going on underneath it, what's going on behind it, what's going on for that young person. And I mean, some of the cases that we're getting now are so complex. There are so many things that those young people and children have been through that actually sitting in a classroom to try and learn is so far down their list of priorities, not even on it. Getting into school is the biggest challenge, getting them in the right uniform, you know. And with some schools will be, you know, very hot on uniform and shoes and all the rest of it. And some of these children are just living in abject poverty. So that, to them, is just like, you know, it's completely off the wall. Doesn't even come into their way of thinking. So if we look at these boxes here, 46% of staff feel their organisations do not support employees well and have mental health issues. Now, a lot of schools that we're in have an EAP, an employee assistance programme, in place as well. When I've done any research about that, whether that's in schools or in other businesses, the percentage uptake on the EAP is so low that actually it's visible and it ticks the box, but it doesn't actually do anything in terms of affecting and helping the people that are in your school if they don't trust it. And often the feedback is, we don't want to contact the EAP because we don't know what feedback the school gets. And I'll say, well, it's top level. You know, what percentage of people have accessed it? It's probably the amount of information they'll get. But there's a real lack of trust around that. So, you know, looking at what your provision is, what you actually have, and how effective, is it doing the job that you need it to do in your particular organisation? 47% feel supported, and that shows a 6% increase from 2022, so that's positive. Know that there is some support there and we are changing, and I think the whole conversation around wellbeing and mental health has changed. The different symptoms that we looked at in the quiz are up there in terms of the percentages of people. Insomnia and difficulty sleeping is one of the things that is a first indicator of being really stressed. Because what happens is we go to bed at a time when we're supposed to be recovering and relaxing, and our brain is still trying to make sense of what is happening. And then we start second guessing what we're saying, we start second guessing everything we're doing, and that imposter syndrome potentially kicks in, or anxiety, or whatever. So that can be the first indicator. And if you're thinking about difficulty concentrating, with the numbers we've looked at, and we've got 41% of people say that's a symptom, and you want them to be concentrating in class, then it's quite scary, these statistics. Overeating at 37%. 37%, I think that's quite high, and I think that's definitely, I would link that to emotional eating. How many people have a busy, full-on day, come home and think, right, and feel like Pac-Man? This is a 1980s reference in the room. Yes? Yeah? I'm just going to eat everything that's available, or have a glass of wine or two. So school teachers report high levels of irritability and tearfulness. Senior leaders experience the highest levels of insomnia. Persistent symptoms can lead to burnout, anxiety and depression, and an increased risk of long-term health issues, as well as reduced job performance. The long-term health issues is the bit that we see. What happens emotionally and mentally, and what happens then physically as well for people. And we don't want to be in that position, do we? We don't want to be in a position where we've got people who are actually, their life outcomes are being affected by the levels of stress that they're in. So I wanted to talk a bit about John. John doesn't look like this, I have to say. This was something I found online. But John, I know. I thought, is he too attractive? No, don't tell him. So John is, obviously I'm not using real names or identifiable features, but John is a head teacher that I've worked with who has 4 children of his own. He is married and his wife stays at home to look after the children. So he kind of goes into school, is a head of a secondary school, big secondary school, and very passionate about teaching. But actually, what he started to show were complete signs of breaking down and overwhelm. So he was trying to make decisions, but then was second-guessing himself and getting himself caught in that really kind of trap of losing his confidence. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating very well, he was having a bit too much alcohol on a regular basis just to kind of, medicate. And he realised that actually, if he was feeling that way, what was ripple effect through the school? So we did some work together, and we put in a whole school approach, supporting him, supporting other leaders, supporting children. And there was a particular issue with girls in year 10 and 11 in that particular area that they had the school, where they were having real issues in the classroom, weren't being able to manage anything. And that provision of the therapy for the children and young people has grown from 1 day to 2 days. We're in 4 days a week now. And what we were able to recognise was that there were certain things that were happening in the community that was then being brought into school, and that was also having a ripple effect in school. There were also themes around children who'd lost family members, lost a parent or lost a sibling, and so we could do group work around that. So there's lots of different things that you can do to kind of inject support. But if you've got leaders who essentially are burning out, then actually we need to look after them first for them to have the capacity to be able to make the decisions, to be able to move the school in the direction that it needs to go in. Does that make sense? So when we're thinking about burnout, this is from the ICD, so International Classification for Diseases. And they looked at burnout as being an occupational phenomenon. All right, so it has these 3 aspects to it. So feeling depleted and exhausted, having that mental distance from the job, so being more negative and more cynical about the job, and then also having that reduced professional efficacy. So if you look at those 3 outcomes there, if you like, 3 symptoms, can you recognise times when that might have been something that you felt? Or you at least know somebody who might have been in that position. So when we're thinking about burnout, we know it's something that's in an occupational context. We know that obviously what we can control at work, how overwhelmed we start to feel if you're getting 300 emails a day, there's no possible way that you can keep up with that, and then the calls and everything else that goes on, and the safeguarding risks that you're then managing. But so we need to think about, right, so what do we need to put in place to actually support those people in those positions, and what do they need? And also, how are they affecting them outside of school, outside of education? What are they taking home? Because I don't know about you, but if I'm really stressed and I've got a lot on, and I've been busy working with people all day, and I walk in my house and one of my children wants to have a conversation, a deep and meaningful DMC, about something that's going on in their friendship group, then have I got the capacity to actually listen to that? Or do I want to say, can you just shut up for a minute and I'll come back to you? I don't do that. I sit and I listen and I help and I support and all that kind of stuff. But there are times when I know I'm at that point of, I haven't got any more capacity left. I've helped, I've done so much. So I've had to put things in place over the last few years to put me first so that I'm okay to be able to do all of those things. Otherwise, I'm the one who keels over. And that affects family as well as work. So when we look at spotting symptoms, our emotional exhaustion, this is what it would look like. Tired all the time, even though you might have had a good night's sleep, unwilling to take on a new project or anything else that needs extra effort because you haven't got the energy, it's not in the bank. And also avoiding offering support to others because you don't care, because you haven't got the energy to be able to do that. Depersonalisation, so developing unfeeling and impersonal responses towards others, feeling isolated and cut off. And often if we're in this place, we will cut ourselves off, because being connected, going back to what Adam was saying earlier, the connectedness, that takes effort and it takes energy. And if we're surviving and we're not thriving, then that's really, really hard to do. And we might find it quite difficult to respond to happy or sad events. So I was working with a head last week, and she said to me, I don't feel really anything. I'm just doing it, just doing the job. I don't feel excited. I don't feel happy about things. I feel really numb. And that's that kind of shutting down, because we haven't got the energy to have those emotions. And loss of sense of personal achievement. So feeling incompetent, going back to the masks that we wear, which I'll talk to you about in a second, loss of self-esteem, and talking about failure or being quite self-disparaging as well, and thinking about the future. So when we talked about what's the positive things for the future, actually if we're in this place, it's quite difficult to believe that there's going to be a positive future, because all you can see is more of the same. Does that make sense? Do people relate to that? Can you see that? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Nikki. So Nikki is a client who wasn't a head teacher. She was a deputy head. She was asked to step up whilst the head was on maternity leave. She stepped up for that role. She was promised all sorts of support. We're going to do this, and this person will help you with that, and talk to this person about this. And whilst she took that role on, there was literally no support. Nothing kicked in at all for her. So she did that job for a year. By the October half term, she was rocking in her kitchen, sitting on a kitchen chair. She'd married, got 2 children, had just couldn't cope, completely got to the end of a tether, and had to have quite a lot of therapy with us to be able to actually figure out what was going on, why she was in this place. She wasn't asking for help either. It wasn't being offered, but she also wasn't asking for any. She was exhausted all the time. She felt that there were huge issues with the staff, so she felt quite paranoid about that. She felt paranoid about what was happening with parents as well, because there'd been something on social media that the parents had all jumped on. So she literally was walking around feeling like nobody wants me here. Nobody likes me, I'm not doing a good enough job. And then that started to kind of sink in, and she kept feeding that information to herself. So after lots of therapy, she actually left teaching. She's a seamstress now. Really experienced teacher, loves children, amazing, and now isn't in education. And that for me is the sadness of this report, because we're not learning anything. We're just getting worse. And there's a lot of things we can do to actually mitigate those risks. So on your tables, thankfully I haven't put that mask out because that's super scary. I don't know where that came from. But on your tables, you've all got a mask. Just have a quick look at it.
This one's got like extra eyes, isn't it?
Yeah, I can put that in there. No, she put pink paper in. It's not scary. It's about what's on the inside as well as what's on the outside. It's not too bad. It's not going to bite you, it's all right. I know it's like linked to a movie and that, but yeah. Everyone had a look? Okay. What's your thoughts about these? What's your thoughts about them?
I can relate to the frontal lobe fire.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Hiding what you really feel.
Yeah. So the whole idea of the mask is, and these are ones we've done in therapy, they're also ones that we did with the general public, and we asked for people to decorate the masks, and we do this in therapy, to demonstrate on the outside what they show, what people see, but hide what's on the inside and what's hidden and what's kind of kept behind that mask. And it's a Jungian idea around the shadow and the persona. So the persona is what we show, and then the shadow is the bit that, you know, kind of hides behind. And some of that shadow is the stuff we never want anyone to know about, which is why imposter syndrome kicks in, because we're thinking, oh my God, they're going to figure it out. So the whole idea behind the mask is to actually demonstrate what's going on for people. And some of those things that are in those masks and the colours they've chosen and the way they've positioned it tells us as therapists far more than we get if we just use language, because language can be really limiting. So sometimes using creativity can be really helpful. But just to I'll just take this one as an example. So this lady is coming up, well, when she did this, she was coming up to the age of retirement. And she remarkably does look like this. It was uncanny. She kept handing it to me and I was like, oh, that's really freaky. But on the inside, what she felt was that she had so much left to give, but people weren't recognising that because of how she looked like. She looked older on the outside and what was actually going on the inside. Loads of ideas, loads of feelings, loads of emotions, and actually didn't know how to translate those things from there into what people might see on the outside. Okay? You've got one here that's got, this was a young person who did this one. This is about their relationship with technology. So I'm not quite sure what they've dismantled to do this. I hope it wasn't anything important, but oh, does it? Looks like an internal mode, and I'll hold on to that piece of information. So on the outside here, and what really cleverly, they'd put an on and off switch on this side to show that they were really struggling to switch it on and off, and it was just on all the time. And then on the inside, there's all sorts of different feelings and emotions and experiences that they've written on in there. Really creative, yeah. It just blew us away, to be honest. So you've all got something like that on your tables, and all of them represent something.
I was just going to say, it's really funny as well how you interpret things differently, because that there
Yes.
initially looked like a scary mask, and then
Yeah.
when you've picked it up inside,
Yeah.
that person's obviously really sad.
Yes.
But how we've interpreted that is nowhere near the way that that person's.
No, and that's the thing. So when we look at people's masks, and I know this one can be seen as scary, it's not quite as scary as that, I'm not quite sure what that's doing, but when we look at people and we see this mask, we can see whatever they're projecting outwardly, but this person then drew the sad clown on the inside, because that's how they were actually feeling. And there were lots of people who'd sent us things with all sorts of, amazing things on the outside. This is what people would say I was, and then actually on the inside, it was a completely different story. And for me, that whole idea about bringing our whole person to work, which we were talking about earlier, we kind of need to accept that everybody's got some of these things going on and not hope that it won't happen, but accept that it does and that life throws things at us, curveballs all the time. You've got different examples on different tables. You've got Spider-Man at the back. Would you mind just holding that one up for me, just so? So this was a guy who said that he feels like he's supposed to know all the answers to everything. He's the dad of the house, he's the person who knows what to do, and he said, so I put my Spider-Man outfit on and off I go, and on the inside he said, I feel like I'm absolutely scared to death, like a rabbit in the headlights. I've no idea what I'm doing, but just felt that responsibility. So when we're thinking about, thank you for holding that up, when we're thinking about people in education, think about the number of masks everybody's wearing, think about what they're hiding behind those masks, and what facilities are we giving to enable them to actually talk about some of those things. The other thing to think about is our self-talk. So a couple of people who've seen me present before will know that I talk about this a lot, but this is a lot smaller sieve than I'm used to, Stalinberg Grange, just saying, but anyway. So if you imagine that this filter, this sieve, is in your head, okay? And that's your filter, right? And that sits in your brain. So as things happen to you, they go through this filter or they stay in the filter, all right? What we do is we hold on to a lot of things. We hold on to a lot of negative things. And when we're in a place of our mental health being affected and our well-being being affected, we can't let go of it. It stays in there, all right? So negative stuff goes round and round. What do you think happens to the positive? Drops through, filters out. We don't need to worry about that because it's already done. I did all right at that. I need to worry about the stuff I'm really bad at, okay? We also throw in your own self-talk into there. So there are lots of things that we say to ourselves in our heads. And if my next exercise was, can you just talk to the person next to you like you talk to yourself in your head, you'd probably all wonder where the lunch is and just want to get out of here. But because we are really our own worst critic, all right? What kinds of things do you think we say to ourselves in our heads?
We're not good enough.
Not good enough, absolutely.
What am I doing?
What am I actually doing? Yeah. Who thought this was a good idea? Yeah, absolutely. How am I going to fit it all in? Yeah. What else?
How am I going to get through the day?
Sorry?
What did that person think of me?
Yeah, what did that person think of me? Absolutely. How am I getting through the day? Loads of worries. I was working with somebody recently and she's a really, really great woman and she's fantastic in this organisation she's in, CEO, fantastic. And she said, I get up in the morning and the first thing I say to myself is, I open my eyes and I think, you're really fat.
You're really what?
Really fat. What are you going to put on today that's actually going to make you look any decent? Why are these people listening to me? I don't understand why anybody thinks I'm an expert. So before she's even got out of bed, there's already all that negative stuff going around. And we all do that to ourselves at different varying degrees at different times, okay? So then you go into work and you're in school and a parent's got a problem and they want to talk to you. What does your head think about that problem? What have I done this time? Absolutely. What's the issue now? We can feel a bit anxious about that, can't we? And we worry about what that conversation's going to be. You have the conversation, there's some negative feedback in it. Do you go away, think about that negative feedback afterwards? Think about what you said and what you could have said differently and all that kind of stuff, yeah? Later in the day, someone says, oh, thank you for looking after Johnny. You really did a great job. I'm really impressed with the school. It's great. And that goes in the sieve, right? So positive stuff. So you're going home from work at the night time, you're in your car or you're on the bus, however you travel. Are you overthinking the compliment you've had or you're overthinking the negative thing you've had? Negative thing. So we filter out the positive and we hold on to the negative. And it's a skill. And you have to start changing that self-talk. Because when we're thinking about well-being, we can destroy ourselves within this whole load of numbers I've just shown you. We can be destroying ourselves quite conveniently and quite easily without anybody else's help. And we need to think about that. How are people actually thinking about themselves? How negative are they being to themselves?
I know somebody, Alexis, and it isn't me. I know you're going to be surprised by it. Who gets up every morning, looks in the mirror and tells themselves how amazing they are.
Yeah.
It isn't me. Somebody told me that.
I don't think that's true, Casey.
I've got this friend about they did do that, and I said, they feel a bit weird, and they were like, well, oh yeah, but it does make you try and think of the positive bit.
Yeah.
Or about their family or something.
Yeah, so positive affirmations, absolutely. We talk about affirmations and we talk about positive self-talk. Not that you are going to believe it straight away, because you're not, but you have to change the pattern of how you're talking to yourself in your head. And it takes time to do it. And then eventually, if 20% of that slips through during a day, that's a win, isn't it? It's better than being negative all the time. So if you think about the number of people you've got in your organisations, and you think about the masks they're wearing and the self-talk they're using, and how are we facilitating that? I was working with a teacher the other day. She's in primary school, and she was telling me about abject fear of having a parent that might have an issue because of previous history. You know, just absolutely fearful of having that conversation and feeling like she was this big in having that conversation. So parents don't think that, though. They think you've got this, that you're all right to manage this kind of thing, but they don't realise the impact of it. The other theme that we see is around boundaries. So when I say boundaries, what do I mean by boundaries? Anybody know? Yes, Natalie. Well done. Being able to say no. Saying yes or no for yourself. It's not all right with me. If my kids are pushing my boundaries and I say, that's not all right with me, they'll go, okay, fair enough, that's it. We've got her to the limit. Nothing's happening from here. But you need to think about, where are you on this spectrum of boundaries, okay? There is a spectrum. And depending on your relationships and who you are in relationships with and how you feel in those relationships and which bit of you kind of turns up in those relationships will depend on where you are on this spectrum, okay? So we've got the rigid boundaries at the top here, which is where we are very inflexible, we'll have difficulty trusting people and we'll reject people and cut them out because it's too difficult and painful to keep working through them. The healthy boundaries, which are around being assertive, asking for what we need, respecting other people's limits, and also being able to say no without feeling guilty, which some of us still work on. But sometimes saying no, if something fundamentally doesn't fit with who you are and what your value system is, saying yes is going to hurt you more than saying no. We want to have a strong sense of who we are, and we also want to share personal information appropriately. If we're in a passive boundaried relationship, or we're being passive in this unclear way, we won't ask for what we need, we will allow others to mistreat us, we will people please, and the problem with people pleasing is that they move the goalposts. So you please that person and they go, that's not quite good enough. I'm just going to put that expectation over here. Oh, I worked really hard to get to that one. Now I'll work really hard to get to this one. Whereas actually the question is it good enough for me? Have I done a good enough job? Not necessarily, am I constantly striving to meet these people's needs? Unsure of what you like, crave external validation and overshare personal information. So there's a lot within that image there, and it's a training in its own right, boundaries. But I wanted to just flag it because it's often a conversation that I have in different ways with different people about those boundaries. What is your role? How do you position yourself with things? What do you say yes to? What do you say no to? What makes you feel uncomfortable? Why are you going along with things that don't feel okay? You know, all of these things are all important questions. And often when we're feeling unwell and our mental health has been affected, our boundaries have gone to pot. They're just really unclear for us. So if they're unclear for us, they're unclear for everybody else. Okay? Where would people say they are on here? Don't share if you don't want to, but if you're happy to. It might mean difference in different relationships and different situations.
Between healthy and unclear.
Okay.
People pleaser, and I can do some of those things,
but you can also be there as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm rigid. I'm more that way.
Yeah. So you flex between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think depending on the situation and also how stressed I am.
Yes. How much capacity you've got. Absolutely. Somebody else was going to say something. Who was that? Felt like somebody over here.
I think you might know what you said, is depending where you are or what you've got going on, because sometimes if you're not quite right, those boundaries change, don't they? Like
Yes.
you say, I think it's a day-to-day, maybe even hour to
Minute to minute. Yeah.
Like to say no without feeling guilty, I think sometimes as well it's the opposite way of actually careful what you say no to, because sometimes you say no because you're stressed and actually you don't really want to say no and it causes even
more problems. Yeah. And I think one of the things I've learned with this, massively so, is if I'm not sure and I don't know where I am, I leave it. And I go away, have a think about it, see where it sits, and then I come back and say what my answer is. I used to just, Claire will tell you, I used to say just yes to everything, didn't I? Yeah. And Claire was just like, what are we doing now? How am I going to keep up with this? So actually being able to actually give yourself some space to think about where am I positioning myself and why am I responding in this way to this person or to this situation?
I think
Go on.
directly asking for what you want or need was one of the revelations that I had when doing a lot of work on boundaries.
Yeah.
I don't mind sharing from about 3 years worth of work with Alexis on boundaries. And it was really a revelation to me that you have to tell people how you want to be treated, because I just made the assumption that everyone would treat me the way I would treat them.
Yeah.
And even whether that's like male-female relationships or whatever it looks like. So I think once you get used to getting the word no out without feeling like you want to be sick, it's also then, you know, how do I actually say this is not acceptable to me, or this is how I need you to show up, because it wasn't even in my comprehension that you needed to do that for people. Yeah. Because I was operating from a people-pleasing point of view. I just assumed everyone would do that.
Understand that.
Yeah. So it's like there's layers of learning about boundaries, isn't there?
I think that's a really good point, that actually we assume that other people will treat us like we would treat them, and they don't. And actually being able to, we assume also that we don't need to verbalise what our boundary is or what we think, because they should just know, right? They should just know it. But usually the clarity, when I do mediations, the clarity that comes from that is what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, for each of you. And how do we verbalise that and actually explain it so that people understand what the limits are? Okay, so I know you're all hungry. Hang on, let me just do this. So what can you do after all of that? So those are just a few themes that come out of the conversations and I think fit with what that research is saying, that we've got a personal duty of our own self-care to prioritise ourselves, which can be really hard when we're busy and we're trying to fit family in and working and everything else. But we've also got a duty of care to support other people with how they look after themselves as well, and model it. If you're not modelling it, how are other people going to know what good looks like? So when we're thinking about training and support, this is the recommendations, which is all things that Fortis does. Training for leaders to recognise and address mental health symptoms and to have those, they didn't use the word crucial conversations, that's my wording, but for me it's actually stop avoiding having those conversations with people because you're not sure, don't want to make it worse, all those things that I've heard, but actually step in, know that somebody's struggling because you can see the symptoms and know how to have that conversation. Training for early identification and support for staff experiencing the symptoms, and also around self-care as well. If you look on social media, not that I'm on TikTok because it's a cesspit of the soul, but anyway. But if you look at what's going out around there, it's all about self-care, self-love, you know, all these things. But actually, what does that mean? What does it mean to people? What does it look like? Development of wellness programs tailored to different job roles. We've seen in those statistics that different levels of seniority have different levels of issues with stress and well-being. So how are we accommodating all of that and not just doing a blanket thing? And having those regular mental health check-ins and proactive support measures. So these are what we do. Reflective practice, supervision, therapeutic coaching, therapy. So this is from the research. Positive support correlates with reduced mental health symptoms, which reduces absenteeism and presenteeism, and I've added in ultimately burnout. Okay, so when you're thinking about strategic, I was talking to a school recently and they said, we've got a wellbeing strategy. And I said, all right, the way you've said that suggests that that's just on a piece of paper. Yeah, it is. So what's the impact on the people in the organisation? Well, there isn't one. We just carry on. And then the culture side of it. So we know that negative organisational culture exacerbates those issues. We want to enhance that culture to improve staff morale. The better the culture, the better the engagement, the easier it becomes. Leadership training on those positive workplace environments. What do you do? How do you make that so that leaders know what's the proactive steps they can make? Encouraging open discussions as well about mental health. In some of the schools we've worked with in the years, those conversations just happen now because there's no stigma attached to it. There's no shame attached to, sometimes I have a difficult time. You know, we all do. Promote awareness of available support. So when I've done research in schools, there'll be a lot of things that are available. If I ask a member of staff what's available, they won't know. And you might have posters on every back of every toilet door in your organisation, but they don't actually know. And if it requires technology, and we're looking at a slightly older age group, that will also potentially be a barrier as well. So how accessible is it? And the other side to the report was about workload being a trigger for overwhelm. So that in itself, I know, is something that is really tricky to manage because there are so many things that are expected. But if you inject some of these other things in, suddenly that workload starts to be seen in a different way. If you're using a bit more AI, if you've got people talking about themselves and what's going on for them and they've got some support, suddenly the workload doesn't seem quite so massive because they've got some tools and strategies to be able to manage it differently, manage the time differently. Okay, so that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour before lunch. How have you found that? Has that been interesting? Has there been things in there that you can take away and consider? Yeah? Okay, so when we go back to the scaling from earlier on, I want you to try and do this on a daily basis, okay? Think about where are you in the morning? Why is that number the number that you've chosen? But I also want you to think about how am I going to improve that by 1? Okay? What am I going to do that's going to help me to improve by 1? That's all it needs to be. It doesn't have to be massive, but just a step up that scale. And keep an eye on how you're doing throughout the week. And that helps you to then promote that for people within your organisation as well. Just checking in. Just check in with yourselves. It's really important. And that's it. That's everything from me. Thank you very much, everybody.